Good morning, everyone. My name is Anthony Whitbread. I'm a research program director with ICRISAT based in Tanzania, and I've had a long association with AgMIP. So it's my pleasure to introduce my co-host, Caroline Musa. Caroline, maybe just briefly introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Anthony. Well, I'm the AgMIP international program lead for the work in the regions primarily, but also in terms of coordinating a lot of the activities of the AgMIP community. And I've had the privilege of doing this since AgMIP was quite young, and it's been a very interesting and fruitful period of engagement and advancement. So but in particular, I really welcome the opportunity to open this session, and I'm going to do so by showcasing a little bit of some of AgMIP's advancement, focusing on the regions. So first of all, though, I'd really just like to thank all the speakers who are here for their preparations, and the audience for not only registering, but showing up in this difficult time of COVID with all of its layers of impact. I'm really so thankful to see all of you here and joining us today. And I have a few behind the scenes comments because that's where I usually am. And I was thinking about it, and that's been true since high school when I would work as stage crew. So this is a long career. So earlier in the week, we heard about advances in modeling to improve resolution around specific temperature, precipitation, CO2, ozone, many other factors. And this morning we heard about research working with stakeholders to really motivate research with directions towards answers, hopefully. So this afternoon, we're going to hear some of the experience of working in specific regions to try to produce specific science information about specific aspects of problems that decision leaders need to be able to address. And that's not only for the future, but often also in the present time frame. So I'm going to just show a few slides to highlight some of the work that we've been able to advance with support from DFID in the early days. Let me bring this to presenter to the full view. Here we go. So just a few highlights. You're going to see some of the information and some of the presentations to follow, but I think there's a few key messages that I just want to make sure that we cover as we head into this. And one of them is that we've been really invested since the start of AgMIP to work alongside with our research colleagues in the region so that we can all learn from one another. And in this period that was from 2011 to 2017, we were engaged with over 30 institutions in Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia throughout that period. So the mission of AgMIP as we undertook this work is really, as you can read, it's, we've heard of time and again that AgMIP is the Agriculture Model Intercomparison and Improvement Project, but that improvement reaches all the way to helping with providing information targeted for decision making in some of the vulnerable communities that are growing much of our food, as we heard earlier today. And while this is a complex diagram, the main thing that I want to emphasize is that, for much of the week until now, we've been sort of focusing on the upper oval, sometimes we refer to as track 1. And as we reach into the regions, we're really looking at a track that we sometimes call track 2 that has to do with the utility of these models in helping with questions and challenges that are faced in the regions that actually often require tailoring and adjustments and modifications to the research methodology underway. It's been a big coordinating effort, and a call out to Anthony Whitbread for his institution, ICRISAT, helping us with all of the agreements and things that we had for the many institutions that were involved, and a call out to the participants who helped us in preparing a 2-volume set of handbooks on the initial phase 1 work. We have a second 2-volume series that is just getting finished up for the phase 2 activities, and we are hoping that will be ready for press later this year or very early next. As you've heard before, that we've been working, focusing on an interactive methodology in which, there are roles for the modelers, but there's a central capacity in terms of really thinking together with stakeholders on the pathways for the future, as well as adaptations for the present or future. And you may have heard of people referring to core research questions. I just want to list them here. These are basically the kinds of questions that we review and prepare the models to run to investigate and provide responses back based on the pathways that are co-defined with the stakeholders and the adaptations as well. So this is another system that we want to do. And we wanted also for the results to be shareable, not only within the context of the stakeholders with whom we were engaging to establish an information set to test, we also want it to be shareable with others. And so we created this, this tool that's basically a prototype is available on our website, and you can take a look at the detailed summaries of the research that has gone forward, as well as comparisons of outcomes and vulnerabilities and levels of poverty and other things in the spatial dashboard. So we're especially, excited to try to bring this to a next stage of incorporating more information and so forth. And just a quick glance at some of the outcomes that actually touch on some of the keywords that were raised in the morning session. We are really working together. We are really pleased with the abilities of our teams to work in region and to be picked up with other research initiatives based on their skills that they have basically helped us to advance with the through our integrated assessment process. So finally, let me just conclude with one last thing, which is that we're very happy to be working again with the UKAID, this time through their, well, it's FCDO. Let's see, foreign, I'm going to have to give up on that one. I remembered it once, but it's the Climate and Resilience Program that the UKAID is investing in. And we're doing that together with partners, including some that are on the panel today. And, here's our basic, we're basically taking the advances that we learned in the earlier phases of work and bringing them to an even more intense stakeholder engagement process. We're also utilizing that to improve and explore new products in the Impacts Explorer, and also working to simulate methodologies for estimating national parameters that can inform both the national and regional sort of adaptation pathways that are being discussed. So that's all I really wanted to say in terms of some of the initial work that AgMIP has done. I just want to reemphasize that the importance of this is really for our learning about utility of models in the practice place, in the policy place, and shaping research problems by engaging closely with stakeholders, and to express our appreciation to Bruce Curry-Alder, who spoke earlier today, as well as Michele Leone, who's our program manager at this time for the CLARE activity, in terms of their support for our ongoing exploration and work. So with that, I'll hand back to you, Anthony, and maybe you can introduce our first speaker. The speakers have a little over 10 to 12 minutes or so, and then we can have a bit of discussion from time to time. So go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, so the first speaker I'd like to introduce is Professor Gita Lakshmi. I've known Professor Gita, as I call her, for many years now. She's a professor of agroclimatology, and she's the director of a Department of Agroclimate Research Center at the Tamil Nadu Agricultural University in southern India. She was an AgMIP principal investigator for South Asia, so Gita's going to give us talk on regional integrated assessment in South Asia for developing adaptation policies and the journey we had with AgMIP in South Asia. So over to you, Professor Gita.
Thank you so much, and I'm really grateful for the AgMIP team because personally I have learned a lot by involving myself into this AgMIP program. So it was a great journey. That's why I just kept it as a journey with AgMIP. Just give me a moment. I'm just sharing my screen. Yeah. So I'm happy to inform that one important thing what happened in India is we are developing Science Technology Innovation Policy 2020. It is initiated by Government of India from the Prime Minister's office, and I've been involved because mainly I gained so much of capacity from the AgMIP program. So I've used some of the AgMIP protocols for developing STIP, Science Technology Innovation Policy 2020 for India. And coming to today's talk, I'm just going to inform about the regional integrated assessment in South Asia for developing adaptation policies, a journey with AgMIP. So we are all the team members, and climate smart agriculture, actually integrating climate adaptation, mitigation, and resilience. This is what is we mean by climate smart agriculture. So for that, we are trying to assess what is the impact and how well we can adapt to the situation that is going to come forward in the future. So effects of climate change at various agricultural systems across varying environmental and social dimension at regional scale. That is our focus. So we have done combined analysis on the influence of weather, soil, farm management on agriculture using biophysical models, developing adaptation strategies, taking into consideration of the heterogeneity across biophysical and socioeconomic as well as temporal variability of climate indicators across the region. Okay, I just would like to show which are all the countries participated in the South Asia region and also the major farming system. So starting from Pakistan, we had irrigated wheat, cotton, that was the cropping system followed. And then in India, we had 3 sites basically. First site is from Indo-Gangetic Plains, that is from Karnal, where irrigated rice, wheat and livestock system was done. And the same IGP has done with the Meerut location, irrigated rice, wheat and livestock again. So Karnal and Meerut, it was taken care of by the IGP, Indo-Gangetic Plains. And then the Karnal region, which is here in Hyderabad, ICRISAT has taken care of that. Rain-fed crop, livestock, fallow, chickpea. So that was the cropping system followed. Finally, coming to our region within southern India, we took Trichy as our study site. We took maize and rice system for our study. So we had different teams. We had climate team, crop modeling team, economics team, IT team, and also stakeholder liaison. Each team had a specific responsibility. So we all integrated ourselves to bring this regional integrated assessment. So I'm just going to showcase you 3 different case studies which happened in India. First one is from Trichy, the second one is from Kurnool district in Andhra Pradesh, and third one is IGP. So this is the system we followed, maize, rice, livestock system, and the cropped area was 56% under irrigation and 44% under rain-fed condition. We had annual rainfall of around 843 millimeters, and multivarious crops was grown there: paddy, cholam, cotton, groundnut, maize, etc. Whereas in Kurnool district in Andhra Pradesh, they have done with the chickpea system, fallow followed by chickpea farming system, and 80% of the cropped area under rain-fed condition. So here it was mainly under the rain-fed condition. They had very low 2 stratification with very low rainfall and also medium to high rainfall. So here low productivity, here high productivity. So there are 2 different strata they have followed, and the major issues were like they had labor scarcity, and the major crops grown in that area was chickpea, rice, sorghum, and groundnut. So I just would like to go in depth one after the other. So the first case study is from Vayambati from Trichy district. So we had, this is the farming system. So we had two crops. The first crop is maize crop, which was grown under Kharif season, which is starting from June to September. And the second crop is rice crop, maize followed by rice crop. Rice crop is a completely irrigated crop. Because we have taken it in the second season, considering that that is our major rainy season. So we had animal component involved in it. And additional factors are household labor, off-farm income, and market linkages have been taken as additional factors for the socio-economic analysis. So the agricultural dominated area, this particular thing we have chosen because it was agriculturally dominated area with these major crops, and 54% is irrigated. The major issue in the study area is the farmers are highly resource poor, fragmentation of holding. The farms were so small, like less than 1 hectare farms were more than 80%, and dependence on monsoon rainfall for crop production is the major issue. So whenever there is a vagaries of monsoon, the crop production was highly fluctuating. The soil productivity was so low because the organic matter content, organic carbon content was less than 0.6%. And we also had problem soils such as saline and alkaline soil, low adaptation technologies. For example, plant population was not maintained properly. There was, they did not follow optimum seed rate, lack of awareness on latest technologies. These were all some of the issues we found there. Coming to the climate analysis, the annual rainfall in that study region was just 766 millimeter. We had two major seasons, the Northeast monsoon season, which is from October, November, and December. That was our major rainy season, which had 412 millimeters of rainfall. And the second season was Southwest monsoon season, starting from June to September, which had around 196 millimeters of rainfall. We had fewer rainy days, only 46 rainy days, and in the main season, 21 rainy days, and the second season 14 rainy days. Temperature was around, annual maximum temperature was around 34.3 degrees Celsius and minimum temperature was 20 degrees Celsius. That was the climatic conditions. So coming to the projections, we have concentrated only on the mid-century and we followed the complete AgMIP protocol of spreading all the 29 GCMs, the changes in temperature and rainfall, and then we had this plot and we segregated and chosen the model. These are the models which was chosen under 5 different conditions: cool, wet, cool, dry, hot, wet, hot, dry, and middle. These are the models chosen for the study region. So accordingly, during the first season, that is the June, July, August, September season, the maximum and minimum temperature increased up to 2.5 degrees Celsius in the mid-century. The rainfall was projected to vary between -1 to +51% by different models. So that much uncertainty existed. Whereas for the major rainy season, October, November, December season, the maximum temperature increase was up to 2.9 degrees Celsius and the minimum temperature increase was 2.6 degrees Celsius. And the rainfall was projected to vary between -14 and +52 degrees, 52%. So this is the current climate variability impact on crop yield, the study crops. So this much variation was there by APSIM model in the case of rice, and in the case of DSAT, the variation was little smaller, and we found that both the models are simulating kind of a model variation was also much higher. In the case of DSAT, it was simulating around 4,600 kilograms, whereas it was close to 4,800 kilograms per hectare in the case of APSIM model. Similar to that, we also had Mace projections, and in the Mace projections, almost the mean was somewhat coinciding in both the models. So we had around 6,500 kilograms per hectare is the yield for maize crop simulated. coming to the impact of climate change, we had different questions as Caroline was informing in the beginning. So to address to the first question, what is the sensitivity of current agricultural production system to climate change? We assume that current production system do not change and it addresses only the isolated vulnerability to the climate change alone. So we had two RCP scenarios, RCP 4.5 and RCP 8.5, and we found that the yield reductions are much higher in the case of hot wet condition and hot dry condition. So the temperatures were the most deciding factor in the future yield levels. So we found that under hot wet condition with APSIM, it was minus 7.1 to plus 3.6% variation we could find. And at the same time for DSAT, the variation was minus 12.5 to minus 6.4. Like that we had. So, and one important observation we had was there was shortening of crop duration by 13 to 15 days in the case of APSIM, and DSAT resulted in decline as well as in DSAT, and it resulted in decline in yield. So the yield decline was because of the reduction in duration. And impact of climate change that we have seen for rice crop. So this is for rice crop. Rice crop also exhibited similar kind of a thing. So both hot wet and hot dry seasons had negative impact on rice production, both under RCP 4.5 as well as under RCP 8.5 scenario. Then the second question was, is there any benefit with adaptation technologies under current agricultural production system? So we found that there is a benefit, and we tried dates of sowing and nitrogen separately as well as under combined influence. So as far as maize is concerned, both APSIM and DSAT model simulations indicated among 5 different dates of sowing, 15th August performed better compared to other times of sowing. So the 15th August gave the best, that is the best sowing window. So if the farmers are sowing early or later, the advantage is not obtained. So we have recommended the farmers to go with 15th August sowing for the maize crop. For rice crop, it is 15th July planting is much better compared to all the other things. So this is the best sowing window as far as rice is concerned. This is one of the adaptation. The second adaptation is extra dose of nitrogen. We found that 9.1 to 9.6% increase in yield could be obtained. Since because our soils are poor, so it is better to go with 25% added nitrogen for both maize as well as for rice crop. So we also combined the best date of sowing with extra 25% nitrogen, and there was a slight yield improvement if we adapt to both the adaptation practices. Then coming to the third question, impact of climate change on future agricultural production system. So for that, we had a workshop at Delhi, and all the Indian team, we congregated together for developing the representative agricultural pathways. So the future production system, how it is going to change. And we also got the information from other teams as well from the South Asia. We had if it is horizontal, there is no change, it upward trend, different scales of trend, increasing trend and decreasing trend, and no trend was followed for different kind of a thing. For example, the soil degradation, pest and disease, fertilizer consumption pattern. We had so many variables, and we tried to engage stakeholders for giving us a direction about the future agricultural production system. And based on their input, we have developed 5 different drafts, of which we have concentrated on 2 different drafts. That is, one is a green pathway, another one is gray pathway. In the case of a green pathway, it is successfully implementing National Mission on Sustainable Agriculture coupled with reform in key sectors such as energy and land and water. So the main thing is resource efficient technologies have been adapted, and it concentrated on the inclusive growth. Whereas in the gray pathway, lower research and development investment was done, low adaptation and low adoption to productivity enhancing technologies, inadequate infrastructure, low investment on health and education. This was the gray pathway.
Gita, we'll have to wrap up now, please.
Sorry?
Just one or two more minutes, please.
Yeah. I'm just going fast. So we have developed adaptation packages based on the RAPs, and with that RAPs, we try to assess the future production system, how it is going to change for different conditions of cool, wet, hot, wet, and we have assessed the impact. So similarly, we did it for both for the future production system for both rice and maize. So the key messages is the temperature, like what happens to the temperature, rainfall changes, and what impact it has, and what adaptation packages we can have. That was clearly indicated. Coming to the second case study, I'll go through quickly within 2-3 minutes. I'll finish it. So the climate change impact and vulnerability of fallow chickpea based household system was followed. We also had similar type of problems in Andhra Pradesh as well. And as I said, we had two different systems, that is with low potential region with low rainfall, medium rainfall with a high potential region. And we found that the sensitivity of current production system to climate change, both hot wet and hot dry, had reduced the yield to a greater extent. Similarly, we also done the vulnerability analysis, and 68% of the farms are vulnerable in hot dry climate, whereas 42% farmers are vulnerable in cool wet climate. And the change in net income and poverty rate was also calculated. And again, the vulnerability of future farm household to climate change was also considered. And in the green pathway, 47% were negatively impacted, whereas in gray pathway, only 43% were negatively impacted. So coming to the key messages, we had again the similar type of climate projections, the impacts, and then the adaptation. So the adaptation, 70% of the farmers were benefited because of the following the adaptation techniques. Coming to the third case study, that is Indo-Gangetic Plain. In the Indo-Gangetic Plains, the climate change impact, they had both green and gray pathways, and this is the reduction in the yield by following the green and gray pathways. They also assessed the vulnerability, and it is found that 52% of the farms will be vulnerable in Meerut, while 35% of the farms will be vulnerable in Karnal district under sustainable green road pathway. Similarly, the adaptation had definite positive impacts in both Karnal and Meerut. So the takeaway message from them is there is a lot of difference in projected net farm income in the two districts, whereas there is not much difference in rice wheat yield. Because of the socio-economic difference, there was a difference in net farm income. So conclusion is uncertainty exists with both climate and dynamic crop simulation model. Temperatures are definitely increasing with confidence. Rainfall is increasing with few scenarios are showing decrease and others are showing increase. Under current production system, yield variation exists from farm to farm. Future farmer climate is expected to negatively impact all the study crops. Adaptation options would help in minimizing the impact. RAPS exercise gives an indication to select valid adaptation options. So this is my last slide. Beyond AgMIP, TNAU with AgMIP protocol, we used to generate climate scenarios of southern India, and we had a PhD student who got Prime Minister Fellowship, and he used the AgMIP protocol for assessing the climate change impacts on sugar production. And in ICRISAT, they developed a proposal for National Adaptation Fund on Climate Change, and it is being implemented in 3 districts of Telangana. So TNAU and ICRISAT, we done the state action plan on climate change for both the states, Tamil Nadu and Telangana state. We used the AgMIP protocols for projecting the future climate and assessing the impact. Based on AgMIP experience, we conducted many capacity building programs at national level with the different funding support. In IGP, AgMIP protocol incorporated into NICRA program, ICR NICRA program, and for modeling initiatives. There are new initiatives as well. We have submitted a proposal to Green Climate Fund. This is under consideration. Modeling GHG emission from irrigated farming system. Quantification of ecosystem services. It is being done by IGP team. Crop, livestock, fisheries, vegetables integrated modeling. in a single window is also being followed. So these are all some of the new initiatives. Because of the AgMIP capacity building, we have been able to participate. So thank you very much for the patient hearing.
Thanks, Professor Gita.
Yeah.
It's fair to say that AgMIP in South India created a great network of researchers, and also the protocols have been used in many, many aspects, as Professor Gita has shown. And also many of the papers are actually still coming out. I know of at least 2-3 of the papers from Southern India that are in the final stages of being published. So thanks very much, Dr. Gita. We'll come back to questions in the Q&A, and please, audience, if you can write them in the chat boxes for us, and we can collate those as well. Okay, we'll move on to the next speaker, who is Dr. Toshi Hasegawa. He's a senior researcher with Tohoku Agricultural Research Center and the National Agriculture and Food Organization in Japan. And he also co-leads the AgMIP rice initiative. So Dr. Hasegawa, please take the floor.
Okay, can you see the video?
Yes.
Yes.
Can
Okay.
make it
All
large,
right.
large screen.
Hello, I'm Toshi Hasegawa from Nara, Japan.
We just lost the sound, Eric.
I'm presenting this on behalf of other 4 leaders of AgMIP East Asian, Fu Tao and Yanzu from China, Kwon-Soo Kim from South Korea, and Motoki Nishimori. And thank you for giving us this opportunity to present our work for the past 6-7 years. Our activities started in 2013. There was a first meeting held in Beijing, hosted by Fu Tao. Ever since, we've had almost biannual meetings, each country taking time to host these meetings. Second one was in Tsukuba, Japan, followed by South Korea, and the most recent one was in December 2019 in Beijing. And next meeting, we're supposed to have next meeting in 2021 in Japan, but the schedule is yet to be finalized. Because our members have so many overlap with AgMIP Rice, we have had close collaboration with AgMIP Rice team in many activities. This is the list of topics that we discussed in the latest meeting in Beijing in 2019. And the topics cover a range of issues from field experiment to the regional assessment. But most of them are focused on crop production. And unfortunately, these activities are mostly done by individual groups or nations. Not much collaboration has been taking place as of yet. But I'll show you some examples of collaboration taking place, mostly in Asian countries with the collaboration with AgMIP rice activities. Here's one example of using field experiments done in Japan and China. That's from the 3-year CO2 enrichment study on rice. And also we've had one chamber study conducted in Florida, provided by Jeff Baker. And we tested the multimodals, crop models against these experiments for future CO2 and future temperature, and we come up with some common observation that the multimodal ensemble work well in these environments. Another example currently ongoing is from multi-location testing. The data set was collected in 3 countries across Asia, 1 in Japan, 2 in China, 3 in Thailand, and different locations using the same varieties with the same, almost same management practices. With these, we are trying to also test our models against for the genotype and environmental interaction. Another example of the collaboration with experimenters is from experiments conducted in growth chamber in Nanjing, where rice plants were exposed to extreme heat stresses just for a short period of time after flowering, very sensitive stage, up to 44 degrees. And 14 rice models are tested against this observation. Unfortunately, we learned that none of the models could reproduce severe heat reductions due to these severe heat damages. And this is one of the examples that multi-model ensembles didn't work. While we continue to work on this crop-based collaboration with experimenters across different nations, but we are also seeking more opportunities to work on regional assessments. One of the things we wanted to do for many years but we haven't been able to do is firstly adaptation options and limits to adaptation across different regions or nations using common crop models and climate scenarios. We are also interested in doing some regionally specific problems, such as air pollution and health, and fertilizer use. In particularly East Asia, we have had some problems with ozone or air quality, and also the pollution caused by the overuse of fertilizers. And the modeling can help these quantitative assessment and also help to find solutions to these problems. These are potential topics that we can discuss, but not concrete plans have occurred yet. Third one is a continuation of our collaboration. That's for the data-driven collaboration. And it's nice to have really targeted research, but it's also worthwhile looking at data available across these regions. There are many long-term, high-quality data sets available across different nations. I think it would be worthwhile to set up a nice data sharing platform of crops and soils so that can be used for the AgMIP exercise. However, we have had some problems with doing more regional assessments, integrated ones, because of these shortcomings of our activities. Firstly, we wanted to expand some of activities to the other regions such as Southeast Asia. This is an idea ongoing for many years, but that hasn't come to reality yet. The second one is also the one problem that we have faced for many years. We wanted to have some collaboration with social scientists that can address this integrated assessment for the regional studies, but we have had no luck in contacting with the good social scientists who can do this work. Thirdly, because of this, we have had lack of direct involvement in policy-making processes. We have quite a few members in each Asian studies, but I think that disciplinary-wise, we still have some unbalanced team, and we hope we can find some alternatives to find better partners. These are the problems we faced from the beginning, but nevertheless, we hope to move on, starting from something we can do. So the next step will be probably opportunities, taking advantage of this plenty of data available, and possibly we can expand this activity toward the different regions such as Southeast Asia. If any of you are interested in activities, please let us know so that we can continue our further studies. I'm sorry I can attend this important workshop because of time difference, but I hope you have a really nice discussion afterward. Thank you for your kind attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Hasegawa. Please put your questions or anything in the chat box, and we'll move on to the next pre-recorded presentation, which is from also the Southern Hemisphere, even further south, Australia. It's a contribution from Rebecca Derbacher, who's a research officer in CSIRO, Australia's National Research Organisation, and Dr. Peter Thorburn, who's a senior principal research scientist in CSIRO's Agriculture and Food Business Unit. And he's also been the AgMIP representative for Australia and for CSIRO for many, many years, and been involved in lots of the AgMIP work so far. So Eric, if you can play the next presentation, and then we'll have a few minutes discussion. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca Derbacher. I work with CSIRO down in Australia. Sorry I couldn't be with you live to do this, but hopefully this will give you a nice taste of what's happening in Australia. So today I'm going to talk about advances in Australia, what's different and a little bit of what's the same. I just also want to acknowledge Peter Thorburn, who's helped me put this together as well. So first I just wanted to do a little bit of a history on what's happened in Australia over the last little while in terms of climate change policy in relation to agriculture. So starting back in the early 80s is when a lot of momentum happened in this space, like many other countries. So that's when we had our first greenhouse conference, which is where all of the interested scientists around climate change would get together and exchange notes. Our next major milestone was really in 1998 when we signed the Kyoto Protocol, which we then ratified in 2007, sort of nearly a decade later. Moving forward from then, in 2011, we were able to legislate a price on carbon, which was quickly taken off then in 2013. By 2016, we also ratified Paris, but it was also the last greenhouse conference, so then we haven't had a clear greenhouse conference collection of all the climate scientists in that forum since then. Thinking about what that meant in the agricultural space, I've just got in the blue line here some of the important groups that was going on as well. So in 1992, after a significant... So in terms of what's the same, you know, I just want to quickly go through a bit of a review I've done recently. So what I did was I went and looked at papers that were researched in Australia that did quantitative climate change projection impact assessments for various crops and commodities across Australia. We found 47 papers that focused on wheat. So this is quite a lot of research although Peter mentioned that he thought there might be more than this, that have looked at this question specifically for Australia. So what I'm trying to do here is demonstrate, well, how comparable is this research? How much can we collate this to tell our national story? So the first level, looking at after 47 papers were collated, how many use the same biophysical model? So of those 47, 34 were using the APSIM model. Then drilling down to, well, it's really important to make sure that we use the same baseline period when doing climate change projections, so we know that the comparison periods are the same. So looking across the baseline periods, there's quite a lot more variation in what authors have decided to use. So looking at those orange boxes, you can see there were just 16 that were completely unique, not repeated anywhere else, and then 4 or 5 sort of more common periods, with 1961 to 2000 the most common there in the blue box in the middle. So then for the papers that had similar or the same baseline periods, who assessed the same projection period? And again, you can see those orange boxes where the lines stop, but there's still a few that are doing the same work. And then in this final line here, we have a look at what those publications actually are. So we've got 4 lots of 2 that use the same model, the same baseline period and the same projection period, and those authors are the same lead authors for the work that they'd done. The final one there on the edge, where we've got 3 papers, they are from a similar research group, but the reason that they have this consistency is because they've used a particular projection data set that had specified the baseline period and the projection periods available for the authors to use. So I guess the point of what we're saying here is what's the same is that a lot of the objectives around the AgMIP program around comparison and protocols, still need to penetrate. So we still got a lot of divergence in these published papers, and it means that we just can't simply review the previous literature to come up with a statement around, for instance, what's the impact on wheat across Australia for 2050. So that's a challenge that still remains. I guess some of the points that are important to note is that, of course, we would expect methodologies to evolve through time, so that papers from 2007 will likely have some differences to those being published more recently. For example, moving baselines and different global climate models. And of course, the studies themselves may have had particular objectives as to why they've chosen different parameterizations of how they're doing this themselves. But what I think it also does highlight is that there needs to be this ongoing communication about the benefit of protocols and standardization to drive some consistency beyond a single and value beyond a single paper when your objectives is a bit broader. So maybe some of what's different. So recently there's been a few advances that are taking us a little bit away from that ebbing and weighing with the federal government policies. So a big one of those is the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, was being talked about for a few years now. So this is really saying that that climate change risk is apparent and it is real for a lot of people. The type of risks we're talking about are transition risks, so transitioning to low economies such as exposure to policy, legal risks, new technologies, reputational risk, as well as physical risks. So these are things like extremes or ongoing gradual shifts in temperature and rainfall. So in New Zealand, they're making this a mandatory reporting system for large companies. And in Australia, we've had our regulators saying this climate risk is foreseeable, and they're encouraging reporting in this space. So then I've got another dot point there for the finance sector. So this is beyond the regulations or the suggested regulatory conditions out there. The finance sector, such as investment companies, banks and insurance companies, are really looking to understand and unpack future climate risk. So that might be risks to land value, portfolio balances, or where can there be some opportunities in the future. Another area that's maybe a slight change but also a little bit the same is around emissions. So New Zealand's got a net zero emission target for 2050. All of Australian states have a net zero target for 2050 or earlier, although we don't have a national one. Various industry bodies have also signed up for this, including National Farmers Federation and meat and livestock groups. And at the same time, we've got an emissions reduction fund operating, which is really driving some carbon farming. So these are all coalescing to sort of drive some need for information for action on the ground. There's also some cross-industry interests, again, off the back of a major drought in terms of how do we better manage our climate risk in the country. So really what we're talking about is informing decisions to have some action on the ground. It's kind of where we're going. I think some of the change is that it's moving a little bit away from government policy. The finance sector is really showing an interest, and industry are also stepping up along with the states. So in order for this to be rolled out, if you will, or taken up, there's a real key drive for transparency, especially in the financial reporting space. Comparability, so that's comparisons, between companies, within a company that have perhaps got different sectors represented, so infrastructure and agriculture as an example, and also between different industry sectors. This needs to be interpretable as well, So these are internally, can people understand what this information means? Can you communicate this with your clients, your investors, the public, so that they understand what you are doing in this area? And it also needs to be able to be integrated into existing decision frameworks, so it works alongside other things. So arguably this would lead to standards and protocols in order to drive a lot of this. And I would suggest that AgMIP's made a lot of strides in this direction. So where are the challenges? We've got some non-traditional participants. There's a degree of upskilling that is needed, but they're also looking for expert guidance. And again, I think introducing protocols and standards are going to help in that space. There's issues around access to climate data and also standardisation of climate projection data. And again, this is something that AgMIP has looked into in the past and has shown how this process can unveil. And data accessibility is also a challenge. So once again, this is something you guys have already encountered in the past and done some work on. So I guess in a wrap, we're really starting to move towards application-ready insights that we're needing in the agriculture sector for a range of clients. So this is looking for robust science that can be easily integrated into decision-making processes. I think that the AgMIP experience is really valuable to achieve this goal. I've just got this little cartoon here to say, people have already put a lot of energy and effort into thinking about this, and that we can catapult off this. So the AgMIP philosophy needs to be integrated into this new energy that's coming through in Australia, and we can utilise the body of work and effort to progress the energies further as we go along. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so 3 excellent talks, all from South Asia, Australasia. Started with Professor Gita. Then we heard from Dr. Hasagawa from the AgMIP rice experiences, and then an excellent talk by a CSIRO on applying wheat models, especially in the Australian context. We've had a number of questions in the chat box. Since we only have one live panelist, we might direct 1 or 2 questions in the last 4 or 5 minutes to Professor Gita. And there's one question from Muhammad Lee to Professor Gita. It's a pertinent question because a lot of your graphs, Professor Gita showed APSIM and DSAT and box and whisker diagrams around that. So his question is, if I had a choice, what would push me to choose between APSIM and DSAT for this decision support based on experience in the field? the multi-model approach may be excellent for a good orientation, but does not allow, in some cases, to make a precise decision. And that's my opinion, he says. So, Professor Gita, perhaps you could respond to that question.
Thank you. That's a very good question. Even when I'm presenting the results to our university authorities or to the state government officials, they pose the same question to me. You are saying that to address the uncertainty, you are doing multi-model approach, but again, it is so much confusing. But to me, like it depends upon the location. When you are calibrating and validating the model, whichever model is close to the observed one, because in few locations, for me, the APSIM was doing perfectly well, whereas in few other locations, DSAT was performing better. So it depends upon our calibration and validation, and it again, the response of the model changes from location to location. That was my experience. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor Gita. I think I agree with you there. It does confuse people sometimes, non-scientists, presenting different model scenarios and not being able to explain why one model is behaving quite differently from another. So I think we should be parameterizing our models as best we can for the system we're working on. And I know there's some difference in opinion around this topic. There was a recent paper by Brian Keating who also indicated a similar approach as well in his mind. I think there was some other questions. I think you've managed to reply to most of those in the question and answer box. There's no other questions. Caroline, can you see any other questions that I've missed?
Gopal had a couple of questions pertaining to the different categories of GCMs and how they're selected, and why hot, wet, and hot, dry were prioritized, and whether it has anything to do with abilities to project temperature better than projecting precipitation, if I recall correctly.
I think I have answered to that question. The major reason is our area is, really speaking, we are already in the tropical region. Our temperatures are really warm. So when we run the model, the impact of increase in temperature was showing the higher negative impact compared to the rainfall variation. But in most of the cases, the rainfall was positively projected for the future. For the scenarios like hot, dry, we took the ensemble nearest to the ensemble. There the impact was much harder. Means the negative impact was much more than the other things. So what we presume is the impact of temperature, increase in temperature had higher negative impact, and to certain extent the wetter conditions not nullify completely, but reduces the impact of the higher temperature. That's what was our observation.
Thanks, Dr. Gita. There's one comment here in the chat box as well. It's from Mohammed Rahimi. Maybe Caroline, you can answer it. He's wondering why AgMIP, are they active in West Asia and Central Asia region as yet? As far as I know, not.
So yes, Alex, you're anticipating that I'm going to ask you to speak on this. We have actually had some starts, but Alex, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you, Caroline. Yeah, so I saw Mohammed's question. I was typing an answer, but I'll just jump in here. So yeah, first of all, thank you, Mohammed, for the question. And this is a very important region. We've had longstanding interest in Central and West Asia. And what has not yet happened is the combination of establishing a team of capable experts that could serve as an AgMIP hub for that region, and that we could work with to organize projects there. We have had little projects. We've had interactions with people in Turkey, Iran. We are actually right now doing projects in Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, and Kazakhstan. So these areas are certainly places that we're developing. We also have new connections into North Africa, not exactly West Asia, but in the Middle East, North Africa context. We've been working with colleagues in Morocco. A little bit later, I'll show kind of how we can get more involved. And the main thing is we need a partner set of colleagues, ideally from a cross section of institutions working in a region, so that we could have that core basis that we could use to pursue and take on important projects for that region. So we remain very interested, but are looking to build that capacity.
Okay, thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Alex.
For that answer. Caroline, you take over the next session, please.
All right. Thank you again, Gita. Lovely to see you again, and also to our sleeping contributors for their recorded sessions, which is certainly better than not being able to see them at all. So now we're going to move the meridian a little bit to another section of the world, and hear first from Dilys McCarthy. Dilys is a senior research fellow at the University of Ghana, and she's also AgMIP principal investigator, and we're delighted to have you with us, Dilys. Can you turn on your camera and mic, please? We had a little bit of technical difficulty earlier. I'm hoping that there you are. Okay, terrific. So over to you, Dilys.
Yeah, thank you. So let me share my screen. Yeah. So thank you for the opportunity. So I'll be giving a brief of AgMIP efforts in terms of research in Sub-Saharan Africa. So start with integrated regional assessment, which is a DFID-funded project, the low input systems, CLARE, WASCAL, and beyond. And I must acknowledge the contribution of Sabine Hoffman to presenting this. And I'm making this presentation on behalf of the 4 teams. That's from, maybe as we move on, we'll see the teams better. So for the outline, I'll make a presentation on the DFID-funded AgMIP phases 1 and 2, which were more or less like the kickstart of AgMIP's involvement in Sub-Saharan Africa. Then talk about WASCAL collaboration and to the low input systems efforts by AgMIP, and then the current ongoing project being funded by IDRC, which is CLARE. So by way of an overview, we had 4 sub-regions. So we had West Africa, East Africa, Southeastern Africa, and then Southern Africa. And each of those sub-regions had 3 countries they worked on. And within this, we looked at a number of systems. In Southern Africa, they look more at commercial farming systems, whilst in Western Africa and particularly in Southeastern Africa, it was typical smallholder farming systems. So again, I'm bringing back to this research questions, which were the core questions for the first phase. So the first one was what the sensitivity of the current production systems are to climate change, and what the impact of climate change is on future agricultural production systems, and then what the benefits of climate change adaptations would be under future production systems. So to answer these questions, we took an integrated regional assessment process. So it's a multidisciplinary approach engaging experts from climate, crops, soils, socioeconomic, and stakeholder engagement. So basically, we had input first from the climate data into our crop and livestock models, which were calibrated and validated with data from experiments, and also had survey data, which were fed in to generate yield data in terms crop yields and livestock production data for our socioeconomic model. An important aspect is the RAPS, which is the representative agricultural pathway, which was done together with stakeholders. And together with stakeholders, we try to envisage the agricultural pathway into the future. So this also fed, served as input into our crop and livestock models, and again, into the socioeconomic models to generate economic impact assessments. And of course, the economic models also relied on input from the global models for this to happen. So this slide shows us the work from Zimbabwe, where they were projecting, that's an output of the RAPs that they generated. So they had generated 3 RAPs. So they had a green Zimbabwe, which is looking more at a sustainable development. So you see things in terms of environmental effects to challenges to environment are less. And then we have the business as usual, which is aiming at approaching the sustainability, and then the high emission scenario, which doesn't take care of environmental sustainability. So the phase 1 ended with a collection of a book, 2 volumes of books. Of course, this was from Sub-Saharan Africa, and together with Southeast Asia, the presentations, Dr. Gita, Professor Gita made. And there have been a number of publications in peer-reviewed journals as well. So we had one from the Southern Africa area, which, so I just have a small capture of part of the results, which says that the proportion of farms in Southern Africa that are vulnerable to climate change in future, that's under future production systems, which was published in Food Security. There was another one published by Fredia et al., which looked at the sensitivity of current agricultural sensitivity of maize production under current agricultural production systems. And one thing that stood out was the fact that depending on the climate model that was used, there was a lot of variability in terms of climate change impact, between 13 to 64%. There have been a number of contributions also in the form of book chapters by Masikati et al. 2019, and also by John Ansel, and there are a lot more of these publications. So I would entreat you to visit the AgMIP, this website, that is agmip.org/Impact Explorer, to have access to more. In phase 2, we had almost the same set of research questions, but with modifications. So there was one new question that was introduced, which was what the benefits of adaptation in current agricultural systems are. And this question was informed by stakeholder concerns during the phase 1, thinking that, okay, what about now? Instead of talking about the future, they still want to have information about the now. So that informed the second question of the benefits of adaptation in current agricultural systems. And for the last 2 questions, the main difference between this and phase 1 is the fact that we had different representative agricultural pathways developed together with stakeholders. And I must say that the engagement with stakeholders was very high. So to look at some of the outputs again from the second phase, lest I forget, there is currently 2 volumes under review, I think Caroline mentioned earlier. And another output from the phase 2 is what we have in on the Impact Explorer, which is an interactive web-based tool on which all the data or the results from each of the regions are populated. And the aim is also to enable policymakers to have an interactive access to the kind of work that we did. So this is an example of Senegal Neuro, and we're talking about between 1 and 2% degrees increase in temperature projected, and rainfall being variable could decrease by between 10 to 20%. And vulnerability, we expect between 14 to 43% of all farms to be vulnerable to climate change impact. But one interesting thing about the Senegal site, okay, I should say the West African site, is the fact that peanuts played a very important role. So on the whole, the effect of peanuts sort of overshadowed the negative impact of climate change on the cereals. Then there was a collaboration between the WASCAL team and AgMIP West Africa, and this led to a study on the impact of 1.2 versus 2 degrees Celsius on cereal yields in West African Sudan. So the shaded areas were the areas that were studied. And just to showcase a gist of the output, the interesting thing here is that if you look below the zero line, you see that for the 3 cereals that were studied, that's maize, millet, and sorghum, that climate change impact under the intensified system. So the intensified system basically had a lot more fertilizer and also plant population more dense. So you see that as you intensify, the effect of climate change appears to rather increase. This work was published in environmental newsletters. To the effort on the AgMIP low input systems, we have a similar output, and in this case, 5 countries were involved. So we had Ethiopia, Rwanda, Ghana, Mali, and Benin. And I think a similarity between the earlier slide, if you look at this axis, you have the input level. So you have 0, 80, and 160. And under the temperature column, what is obvious is that as the level of nitrogen increases, you see that the yield decline also increases. So this is something that policy makers need to take note of, and to design systems supposed to manage this kind of risk. But what became more evident is the fact that there is a lot more need for model improvement, and also to be able to actually evaluate the interaction between nitrogen fertilizer and elevated CO2, and also to be able to evaluate the nitrogen mineralization under elevated temperature. And this is particularly more important in the low input systems that rely a lot on the soil carbon for nutrient sources. And there is also a need for a strong research agenda for setting up pilot soil crop monitoring experiments at across maybe representative sites across the Sub-Saharan Africa, to be able to gather enough data to carry out a more in-depth and definite analysis. Then currently there is an IDRC funded initiative called the clear transition activity. So this is building up on the AgMIP phase 2 work, and this involves three countries, namely Ghana, Senegal, and Zimbabwe. And the main aim of this activity is to be able to influence adaptation planning processes and also the review process of the NDCs, and also serve as a platform or a source of information for donor and development partners to support their decision making in terms of tools that could be used, etc. And again, even more in this phase 2, the stakeholder engagement is very central to this, and it involves the development of scenarios. So we are working on 3 scenarios that's looking at the green sustainable, that's the sustainable development pathway, looking at the high emission, and then business as usual. So this is being done in collaboration with multidisciplinary teams and also with the stakeholders in the agriculture sector and other related subsectors. And after the process of finalizing the scenarios, we would move on to an ex-ante impact assessment, and we hope to be able to identify gaps required for, or the requirement for transitions from the business as usual scenarios, which best characterize most of the situations in some of the countries I mentioned, to a more sustainable development pathway, and will also serve as a guide to climate change adaptation planning, hopefully. And also the capacity to use research-based scenarios for informing climate change adaptation planning, we hope would be improved as a result of this activity. There is an additional activity also still being funded by IDRC, which is just a short one, on impact of COVID-19 on food systems. And this is being done in Zimbabwe. So with this, I'll say thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Dilys. Really great summary of the work that's been going on in Sub-Saharan Africa. Just wanted to add that actually it was possible for the IPAR team in Senegal to apply separately for a COVID study as well, and so they will be advancing that. So we'll at least have a couple of places that we can sort of intercompare and think about the COVID. I would just like to also say that, you know, this clear transition activity that Dilys and others are leading is, you know, when you're working with stakeholders and you're required to do all of your work remotely, it puts some real, you know, sort of pressure on things. And I just really appreciate how much all the teams have contributed to translating to you know, lots of interviews and this kind of process in order to gain the kind of information that we're advancing with the project. So that's really terrific. So I think we will just at this point go on, and I'll have Dr. Frank Evert, who's the scientific director at the Leibniz Center for the Agriculture Landscape Research, otherwise known as ZALF, in Germany. He's been in that position since 2016. He has a history that would take the full 15 minutes for me to introduce. So I will leave it at that and turn over to you, Frank, for your comments on work that's ongoing in Europe. And I just, in saying this, I think you know, we have the studies in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa that were enabled from the DFID funding, but elsewhere in the world, we have many scientists who basically recover grant funds or institutional funds to advance collaborative work. And a lot has been done from these opting in persons interested in sharing protocols and advancing the science. And I'm looking forward to hearing what's been going on in Europe. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Caroline, for the nice introduction. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I will give a short update on some activities with AgMIP relevance, more or less AgMIP relevance in Europe. And I've given that presentation a little title, Improving Modeling for Resilient Cropping Systems in Europe and beyond, because the term resilience and sustainability is an important issue as you in Europe, as you will see later on in the presentation. In the content part of the slide, you see the different items that I will pick up on my next slides. Since the last meeting, if you go to the next slide, since the last meeting, AgMIP last meeting in 2018, a number of studies have been published with the aim to assess impact of climate change in Europe, different crops. And an example is given here of a study that was published about the time when the last meeting took place, where we have assessed the impact of climate change, different climate change scenarios on 2 crops. And we're particularly interested to understand how important different extreme events are for any yield responses. And in this study, we see that particularly the drought stress is of critical importance for, in this case, maize, less so for wheat, and also less important was the heat stress impact on these crops, which was to some extent a surprise. But I've included this slide here with these results as an sort of an indication that there have been several studies across Europe where people have tried to analyze and assess impacts of future climate change. If you go to the next slides, we've also spent quite a bit of time on understanding better the impacts of extreme event. And this slide, some of you may have seen because it was presented in another session as well. And it shows an analysis over a period of 20 years of extreme events. And we have done this analysis because in Europe, we've seen very severe droughts in 2018, 2019, and to some extent also in 2020. We have never had such a sequence of dry years in a row. And even though we had these extreme years, we still see differences across regions, as you can see from the maps. And we see differences for different crops in the different extreme years that are sort of shown here in this graph. So those sort of information from an analysis, data analysis point of view are quite interesting to us. First, to understand how important are these extreme events and how consistent they are, and are there any other factors that matter and that we should be aware of and that should be included perhaps in our models in order to improve our the capability of models to assess such extreme events. If you go on, there have been other activities, and this slide refers to an activity which has also been presented in one of the sessions. It's called Bad Jam. It includes scientists from Europe, but not only. And the aim of this activity is to improve the bias correction for our agricultural models. And you see some of the methodological aspects listed here. But you can see that 13 bias adjustment methods have been tested for different meteorological variables. 8 models have been used for a number of locations. 8 climate models have been used, and 11 crop models have been used in order to assess impacts for these locations with respect to particularly 9 phenotypic and crop variables. So quite an extensive effort, interesting I think results will come out and have come out of this, and I think we will see interesting publications from that in the near future. If we go on to the next slide, an important activity that has emerged out of Maxua and to some extent with good links to AgMIP activities is the pest and disease modeling. And I think we've initiated that pretty much around the meeting in Gainesville that we had several years ago, AgMIP global meeting. From then on, a number of activities have happened. And now we look at 4 components, at a framework that has 4 components, and the 4 components you see listed here. And they have been used in conjunction with crop models in order to assess the effects of pests and diseases for, in this case, for wheat and for a range of pests and diseases, as you can see on the x-axis of the graph below. And once you have this capability, you can assess the effects of different severity of pests and diseases. And how important that is will also become evident on the further slides that we will see later on in the presentation. If we go on to the next slide, please. There's another activity that has cross links between European consortia called SASCAP and AgMIP, and that refers to the modeling of ozone impacts. The project is called Developing Resilience and Crop Resource Use Efficiency to Climate Change and Air Pollution. And there have been right from the beginning some good interactions between the community in Europe that's worked on ozone modeling, ozone impact assessment modeling, and AgMIP. There are regular exchanges, and we were happy in Europe that we got funding for this activity. And if you go to the next slide, it shows, for those of you that are not so familiar with that, where the main focus of that project is, and it is on improving the resource use efficiencies for radiation, water, and nitrogen under climate and air pollution, and particularly ozone. And there are a number of ambitions with respect to the identification of wheat crop traits that are tolerant and resilient to combined stresses, and to develop best practices in crop management. But there's also a link to farmers and stakeholder engagement. And we have heard in the presentations before how increasingly important that becomes, this link to stakeholders becomes also for us as modelers. Go on to the next slide. Anticipating the COVID situation, this group or colleagues of that group have also written an opinion paper or a paper where they try to understand or ask the question, will this COVID situation have an effect on the emission of air pollutants, and in course also on the effects that ozone concentration or perhaps reduced ozone concentration may have on crop yields. And at the end, there are some conclusions and requests with respect to the modeling that may address that and provide really quantitative evidence for such ideas that are sketched in this paper. Go on to the next slide. I pick up on the comment I made before regarding the interaction between our modeling community, our scientists, and stakeholders in politics and also agriculture practices. And I refer to Maxua, modeling European agriculture with climate change for food security. There's been a project that was initiated in 2012, and since then has gone through 2 phases. We are presently setting up a 3rd phase, which we call the Science Policy Hub. And in this 3rd phase, and there are good chances that we will get funding for this phase through the different countries that have an interest in this. In this phase, we pretty much try to bring the modeling activities closer to the policy questions. Our policy questions are being formulated in the different countries, and the formulation of the policy question goes in interaction with the modeling communities, with the modelers, and we try through this link to get our knowledge and our expertise closer to the policymakers and really have an impact on the design and the development of policies. If you go on to the next phase, I've included this phase because policy making in Europe at the moment is quite a sensitive and yeah, sensitive issue, and also something that is pretty much changing at the moment. You are aware of you're probably aware of the European Green Deal that is quite a change in the general policy of the European Commission and also the member states. And one of the big aspects of that Green Deal is to anticipate much better the climate crisis and any activities that have to be undertaken in order to deal with that crisis. And there's one aspect in that Green Deal that is relevant for agriculture, and it's called the Farm to Fork strategy. And the goals of this Farm to Fork strategy is to create a robust and resilient food system, tap into new opportunities, and lead a global transition towards a competitive, sustainable farm to fork system, and also to reduce environmental and climate footprint. So this Farm to Fork strategy is also pretty much shaping the calls, the funding in Europe when it comes to agriculture research, environmental research, and also food systems research. And there is good belief that the topics like climate change and also sustainability, resilient systems will see some good funding in the future in Europe. If you go to the next slide, we are just expecting any day now what is called the European Green Call. That's a research and innovation call within the European Green Deal. It's a 1 billion call. And there are several initiatives that are in a good position. One initiative which we've just sort of set up is called the European Research Alliance towards a chemical pesticide-free agriculture. That's a larger alliance. And as the topic already indicates, it's focused primarily on chemical pesticide-free agriculture. I've included this here because it meets some of the demands of the Green Deal and also of the Farm to Fork strategy, and it has implication also for our climate impact research, because any consequences that emerge out of such activities will have an impact on our crops and cropping systems, and will have an impact on the way we model our crops and cropping system, on our capabilities to model these crops and cropping systems, and being able to design these crops and cropping systems, not only with respect to climate change and climate adaptation mitigation, but also with respect to other goals related to sustainability aspects, and in this particular case to the reduction of pesticide use. If we go on, I've included this slide because the Joint Programming Initiative on Agriculture, Climate Change and Food Security has been very active in setting the scene and supporting projects that are of relevance for the topics that are also being addressed in AgMIP. And we have seen very good cooperations between projects funded with the help or under the idea also of FACI JPI and AgMIP. I already mentioned Maxur. Maxur has been a project initiated through FACI JPI, but also SysCap, project on ozone modeling. And I've included this slide to give the information that the FACI JPI activities will continue in the future. There's just been a new strategic research agenda sort of accepted, will be published soon, where the new direction of the FACI JPI is outlined, research direction, but there is good synchrony with activities that we see internationally, also with respect to AgMIP. And I expect that there will be much more opportunities to interact between Europe and AgMIP. If you go to the next slide, there have been these interactions already out of FACE into other European, but of course also outside Europe countries. And one example, and that's my last slide, I think that's a very good example of the interaction, the cooperation that we have seen in the past between activities in Europe, Maxur, for instance, but also others, and AgMIP refers to the crop modeling activities. And if we can go to my last slide, there's no more, yeah, this one. I've included this because this is a very nice example of how this interaction can work and has produced a tremendous outcome and very good results. We were able to have the second iCropM workshop earlier this year in Montpellier. 4 years ago, we had the first one in Berlin. This was the second one. It was probably for many of us the last time that we could meet in person. We were just lucky to get this through. After that, everything closed down. And I hope we don't have to wait another 4 years to meet again. But with this, I like to close. I think it's a very good example of working with an AgMIP and with other initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank, for that really nice coverage of the activities that are going on in Europe and all of the opportunities for interacting and learning more. And we had a couple of chats today wondering about, new science programs having new opportunities for new postdocs and things like this, or doctoral students even. So I've referred some to the AgMIP listserv, so I will just encourage that if there are opportunities that you're aware of, please share so that we can share them forward. We have a few questions that are having to do with the Claire work. So Adilis, maybe can you turn your camera back on? If you are able to do so there, good. I wonder, Marco, is it fine for you to just turn on your microphone and perhaps ask your question, or would you like me to read it? I will read it then. The Claire scenarios are named after global CO2 concentration pathways. How is the AgMIP team working on exploring the influence of global economic CO2 concentration scenarios on changes in land management in specific countries? Is it not plausible that high global concentration scenarios are compatible with sustainable agriculture practices at the local level and vice versa? So that's a two-part question. And I wonder, the extent to which the land management or land allocation comes up in discussions with stakeholders too, in terms of trade-offs between, more agricultural land for productivity versus intensification, or maybe both. Anyway, I wondered if you might address this in the context of some of the underway Claire work, and then I might also turn to Frank for some comments on this topic as well. Okay,
thanks for the question. So basically, with the three scenarios that we are working on, those are informed by what we refer to as the SSPs. And these SSPs have a number of parameters that they consider. So we have the land management issues as one of them. We have issues with population. We have issues with fossil fuel use. We have issues with technology, and etc. So what the main differences are between or within these three scenarios is the degree to which each of them takes a particular parameter in particular. So if you take the high emission scenarios, for instance, it's driven mainly by development and need for rapid economic growth with little attention given to environmental issues, while the sustainability looks more of trying to create a balance between ensuring that the environment is protected as well as getting some level of production. So it is the CO2 issue is also embedded in each of these three, but what is varying is the level to which it is being taken into consideration. So you say maybe CO2 emissions would be higher under the high emission scenarios as compared to the green or the sustainable development, and maybe the business as usual would be midway between the two. So all these other factors are considered in each of these scenarios. So what really differs is the extent to which each of this is considered under each of the scenarios.
Great, thank you, Dilys. I wonder, Frank, do you have any further comments that you'd like to add in terms of the scenario work that's going on in Europe and how trade-offs between,
I didn't mention that explicitly because there are so many activities that come out of Maxur and other related projects. But particularly with respect to the scenario development, there has been quite some good progress in developing shared socioeconomic pathways for agriculture. Well, there are some standard scenarios that could be used can be used in the different countries in Europe, and that will be used. Certainly will be used also within the activities of the Maxur Science Policy Hub. And of course, there will be some further development and through the stakeholder engagement, some refinement, but there has been some great progress. It's also published. That is one aspect. What was the other part, Carolyn? You had a second part to that?
Let's see, I guess, is it not plausible that high concentration scenarios are compatible with sustainable agriculture practices at the local level and vice versa? It's sort of linked, I guess. Yeah.
Are compatible, high concentration pathways are compatible. I mean that very much depends on the local condition. What is compatible, what is not compatible. Perhaps I take that as an opportunity to say that in the future, if we want to come to impact of our research, and to some extent that became also clear from the other presentations, we have to go to that local to that local level and anticipate the diversity that we have in the cropping systems and also farming systems. So the soil climate variability, small scale variabilities that we have that need to be addressed, and also with the socioeconomic specific conditions in order to come to meaningful advices and solutions for very local situations. So that, I guess, it's quite a challenge, and also to combine this with other ambitions that we have in terms of transforming our production systems towards more sustainable systems. That's a great challenge ahead of us. You can talk about this on an aggregate level relatively easy, still challenging, but if it comes down to anticipate the spatial variabilities that we have, that's a great challenge.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you both. Can I
make a quick comment?
Oh, yes, Dilys, please, go ahead.
Yes, so I'm thinking about it again when you repose the question. And for areas where, I mean, the resource base is already very much exploited or overexploited, it will be a real challenge to be able to have sustainability with high production, because the approaches you would have to use would entail that some of the resource bases will suffer more. So if you talk about if you talk about Sub-Saharan Africa, for example, and you want to increase productivity, economic growth, you would have to move beyond the current system of using low mechanization to higher mechanization. And this will come at some cost and some environmental costs. So it is a tricky thing, and the general feeling is that this will be a challenge, and it is usually seen as something which will not be very sustainable. There could be modified ways of having it done, but it cannot be entirely on its own to have high mechanization, for just as an example, and sustainable development pathway in areas in Sub-Saharan Africa where the soils are already depleted.
Dilys, thank you for those additional comments. Yes, it's really quite important to keep that in mind.
I just see that, sorry, Caroline, I just see that that paper that I referred to has been sort of included in the chat regarding the scenario development. So if someone is interested, you find the reference in the chat or in the,
yes,
in the question section. Yeah.
Yeah, Roberto Valdivia did that for you.
Yeah, Roberto did that. Thanks, Roberto. Yeah.
All right, very good. Well, thank you both for your presentations today. I can see that there are additional questions, but I'm afraid we need to move on. So back to you, Anthony, for the last set, and we'll move to the Americas at this point.
All right. Yes, we're moving on to the Americas. In the Americas panel, we have two talks, one around Latin America and the Caribbean, and one around North America. The first one is from Kelly Witkowski, Manager of Climate Change and Natural Resources Program for the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture in Costa Rica. Kelly, I see you there, so the floor is yours for the next 15 or so minutes. Thank you.
Great. So you're seeing my screen okay?
Yeah, we can see it and we can hear you.
Okay. So pleased to be with all of you today. This session is really great. I see so much value in this global community, learning and seeing what others are doing and getting lots of ideas for how we can advance in LAC, where in Latin America and the Caribbean, where we are advancing slowly but surely, kind of coming out of our shell and getting more engaged and trying to catch up to the other regions where there are obviously significantly more advances. We put this title because it's a little bit indicative of how we are advancing in the region. I only got to hear the closing remarks on the panel this morning, but for many of us, modeling is not our day-to-day or our bread and butter, and it can be quite overwhelming. Myself personally have been engaging with AgMIP for about 6 years now and absorbing it slowly, listening, learning, and particularly through slow and patient explanations from Roberto Valdivia, really understanding the value and the potential of this for supporting agricultural decision-making in Latin America and the Caribbean. Without a large project in this region, we've been trying to come at it more from the demand or the applied side, and that obviously takes time to create. I actually don't think we need to work on creating demand for this type of tools and analysis and outputs. It's certainly there, but we do have to work to help people realize the potential of these tools and that these tools can help meet a lot of the decision-making demands that they currently have. So, you know, when they're useful, you know, when they're not, what is needed to use them, what they can and can't tell us, and what we need to combine these tools with to effectively translate not only into policy, but actually into action at the farm level. And the little comic that Rebecca put up in the presentation for Australia, I thought was really quite perfect, because it's something that, you know, we know exists and we're not fully capitalizing on in the region. And the last mention that was made in the presentation about Europe, about the need to get down to a more granular local level, is also something we've really been struggling with in a lot of the development projects that we design, because we are trying to include components of the work that AgMIP is doing, but we need to do it so that it meets local needs, but also is sufficiently representative across the different countries that we work to demonstrate to the donors that they're really, this is a worthwhile investment. So again, we are advancing on different fronts, but very much attempting to identify the needs and position these tools. This presentation we pulled together, we contacted quite a few people from the region to try to give you a little bit of information on the advances that there are. So from Brazil, thanks to Fabio Marin, they've been using the AgMIP protocols to explore the climate change impacts and adaptation options for maize, soybean, and common beans. Collaboration between the University of Sao Paulo, Embrapa, the Federal University of Santa Maria, and of Mato Grosso. And they have two, I think the second two publications here on maize and soybeans are published already, and the first one is currently, has been sent for publication. So some good advances in the science out of Brazil. Also, we've been working together with New York University and Oregon State University to pull together an integrated assessment of the system of rice intensification to help advance towards a more sustainable and resilient agricultural sector. And this is, you know, we've been setting the baseline. We know that SRI has advanced at a slower rate in Latin America than in Africa and Asia, but because it does create this triple, a really truly climate smart agricultural win, but the adoption is low in Latin America, in large part because of high cost of labor and lack of mechanization. And so there is a lot of interest, because especially from the water savings aspect and greenhouse gas emissions reduction. And we really want to do this integrated model to see how SRI will behave or under the current and future climate scenarios from a whole bunch of different functions, and how we can demonstrate that this system will help meet a lot of the different poverty, health, and resilience and mitigation goals while we enhance productivity to meet the demand that is outpacing supply in the region. We are also designing this in a way to work with Tamil Nadu Agricultural University out of India, together with Vietnam, we've talked about, but really coming to come across regions and develop this analysis for SRI that we could then implement and learn from each other. We've submitted 4 proposals so far and haven't had success, but we are still moving forward. Next year coming up, we actually have a project with the readiness window of the Green Climate Fund, and we were able to include a component to estimate agricultural benefits, trade-offs, and synergies for adaptation and mitigation options in the NDCs of the Caribbean, of 9 countries in the Caribbean. And we're looking to identify 2 or 3 key farming systems in kind of 2 sets of countries, probably the real small ones in the OECS, and then the larger ones on the continent in Jamaica, to identify and develop a proof of concept, and then start to train local scientists, particularly on the multidimensional trade-off analysis, and hopefully using a process that will allow us to get started on get people interested, build the capacity, and make sure it stays in the region. And this project also has a component of outreach to policymakers, and is specifically being designed to inform future investment from the Green Climate Fund. And so we're really excited about working on that with Ohio State University, and also the MACB workshop on Friday, which we think is really going to be a great benefit for the region. Here, just a couple projects from the Andes led by Senami, which is the National Meteorological and Hydrological Service of Peru. This first one is focusing on improving capacity to generate user-focused climate services that provide significant socioeconomic benefits for the ag sector, has a lot of capacity development components, and another one on information and governance and action to reduce drought risk in the Altiplano of Peru and Bolivia. Again, focusing on improving and adapting processes for user needs to support climate risk management. The AgMIP climate protocols were used for quality control, and they're also currently contemplating the use of the climate protocols to generate the future scenarios. In particular, in Peru, there's an emphasis now on understanding the link between climate change and changes in precipitation and moisture to diseases like dengue. So I know that they're also looking at that in the rice, and that's another, the rice sector, and that's another space where we think that integrated analysis of SRI can really support. Circling back to the generating or advancing the demand, we've worked a bit on raising awareness. We developed a policy brief, a whole bunch of authors in English and Spanish that was distributed to the biannual meeting of or every other year meeting of the Inter-American Board of Agriculture. We also, during the pre-COP 25 here in Costa Rica, had an interministerial dialogue between the Ministers of Agriculture and Environment for the countries in Central America and the Dominican Republic. And we were able to present to them a little bit about these tools and it sparked some interest. We also pulled together a chapter for the AgMIP handbook, trying to pull together kind of these isolated advances in Latin America and analyze a bit what we need to do to advance more quickly. And also an advance was that Tsunami was able to translate the AgMIP protocols into Spanish. So just to finish up here, there's a lot of building blocks in the region. There's a lot of ongoing modeling exercises that perhaps are not directly linked into AgMIP or using the AgMIP protocols, but they can certainly benefit, or AgMIP efforts in the region can build on them. Francisco Mesa from the University of Chile has been developing a set of agricultural sector climate risk maps as a part of a broader initiative that's providing a really great data and information base in that country. In Argentina, led by Edgardo Guevara from the INTA, the National Agricultural Research Institute. You know, he's been working on the platform, the Cassandra, which is the trade-off analysis, and the platform to assess the potential productivity of soy in the Gran Chaco. In Bolivia, a lot of efforts led by Bruno Condori. There's a GCF readiness project that's looking at just investment in the agricultural sector post-COVID and how to promote a green climate resilient recovery in the sector. There's also holding a series of national forums on agriculture in the NDCs, and we are looking to position these tools that AgMIP has as a key part of informing that process in the country. In Mexico, they're developing a whole series of actions on reducing emissions from the livestock sector, and we've applied for a few projects to use AgMIP, the AgMIP protocols to help inform that effort. We're also planning for the implementation of the TOAMD course in Spanish next year to try to reach out a little bit more of the audience in the region. And there's just a whole lot of opportunities and decisions that are being made, policies and plans and investments that can really benefit from these tools. And we really think that, you know, for instance, a lot of the countries in the region are setting the net zero goals. There's the long-term strategies. The fact that agriculture, AFOLU represents 40% of the emissions coming from this region is really a strong motivation to seek further investment and, you know, both of time and resources into expanding AgMIP's reach in the region. We're thinking that we would really like to do a baseline analysis of the state of the art in the region, just better mapping, you know, how ready are we? What are the existing capacities for the climate, crop, livestock, and economic modeling? You know, what are the data resources out there that we can deploy? What are the studies that have been done? It was really great to see what they pulled together for wheat in Australia. We're looking at creating more spaces for the science policy dialogue using existing mechanisms, and there tends to be a pretty high level of regional integration or mechanisms for regional integration in Latin America and the Caribbean, such as the Central American Agricultural Council or the Southern Cone Agricultural Council, that are policy spaces that would help us jump into multiple countries at the same time. We're also looking to better characterize the actors and very specific information needs, you know, from the local up to the national and regional level. And then also really building capacity. And there we're referring not only to the modeling capacity in the region, but to the understanding of the technicians and higher level decision makers as to how these tools are useful and how to interpret and apply the outputs for this. And of course, we also have a strong focus on looking for mobilizing resources to help us advance a little further. So again, thanks to Bruno, Edgardo, Fabio, Irene from Trevejo, from Tsunami, Roberto Valdivia, and a couple others who, Francisco Mesa, who contributed to this presentation and whose work we hope to keep collaborating on in the future. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kelly. I think many of the AgMIP community have fond memories of visiting Costa Rica and your institute, Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture. I think it's 2 years ago. So it's great to hear a lot of progress has been made in those 2 years. I didn't see any questions in the chat. We may have a few more questions come in as we hear the next talk. So we'll cover that soon. Thank you, Kelly. So now I'd like to introduce Bruno Basso. He's the MSU Foundation Professor for Michigan State University. And Bruno is going to give us a talk on approaches to precision and regenerative agriculture in North America. And we see your presentation, Bruno, so the floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Anthony. It's a pleasure to share with you some of the latest work done in North America within the context of AgMIP. And I thank the organizers to inviting me to present some of this work. So the area that we're really targeting is not necessarily interesting from a biodiversity point of view, because it's really just corn and soybeans, pretty well expanded, over 92 millions for corn, 84 millions of acres of soybeans. But they do play a critical role in the food system globally because of the amount of grains they produce, and it's also a very biologically productive place. Even to outproduce the Amazon during peak vegetation, as you can see from this fluorescence map of excessive photosynthetic amount fixed by the plants. And so in this context and this work, it's mostly focused on the US, even though over the last years we've been discussing the possibility of launching. We were getting close to it, and then during the last year things have really messed things up to launch a AgMIP North America, which would include also Canada and Mexico. The differences in this approach is that we really, in addition to advancing the sciences and applying models, and we really are challenged by stakeholders. And so, as you heard this morning from Sally, models just play a critical role. Not just one model, but the diversity of models and structure and so on, with different goals. And but we need to move into a solution-driven approach. And so most of the work here, it's really targeted at delivering those sorts of outcomes, in assessing, even from my title, how we could leverage this large amount of data coming in, this so-called big data from digital agriculture, but also how the farmers are moving and they're pushed towards this longer-term resilience sorts of practices called regenerative, the new terminology, just in the sense of, instead of just limiting to stopping degradation, but also moving up and building carbon and ecosystem services. So there are also a very large amount of NGO very interested in using models. I am on the Science Board of Field to Market, which looks at the sustainability all around of these terms that you see there, how best we could use land use, conserve soil, carbon, efficiency in irrigation from water quality, quantity, and energy, greenhouse gas emissions, and so on. Biodiversity plays a role. So this is a diagram of a project that John Antold and I and Cynthia Sentold and several others of the AgMIP trying to put together, where we really gave a significant amount of value and importance in interacting with stakeholders in order to apply models, and not just, again, crop models, but socioeconomics, to address through trade-off analysis how we could, again, leverage this challenges for long-term sustainability in this system. So these regenerative practices, we all know, you know, that conventional tillage, unfortunately, in many places still goes like that. That causes all this degradation of soils, runoff, and soil erosion, and retaining residues. No tillage brings this very critical component of building soil health and be able to have a better system for water holding capacity, nutrients, and be able to again retain residues and move on with this pretty much you know, untouched soil and with all the benefits associated with it. So we have been, as part of one of the projects that I had, long-term analysis of many different type of practices of the single crop like corn, you know, the typical application of they put all the fertilizer in the fall versus rotations. And so you'll see that some of the regenerative practices, again, of cover crop, no tillage, reduce nitrate leaching, but also, in addition, they also mitigate significantly the losses of carbon. So that's just one example. This was done on several field by producers, but the next thing that we have been moving on, it's actually running it spatially. And so, in addition to us, this sorts of question, what is the value of you know, the benefits of moving from conventional tillage to no tillage to cover crop, is that we have, I was fortunate enough to attract funding to be able to collect information. And so these are the number of producers that we have, just about anything we want to know, management information and yield mapping, and for the last several years. And so we have to move on into much more validating scenario, asking questions, working with them in order to see what is the price of changing from one practice to another. It's just simply, it's just too easy to say, oh, you need to put cover crop and no till, because it just may cost them money. They don't see the value on a short term, and so be able to work and train them in seeing the value of the long term ecosystem services. And so we're doing this, even attracting them through carbon credits. And so there are several ways that we're working on that, and I'll present some more tomorrow during the mitigation and adaptation strategy. So the ground truthing here is critical. The other thing is that we're doing, as part of the long-term investment of the National Science Foundation, of having accounting for climate variability, because it's obviously one of the critical pieces that climate change brings. Is not just the global warming per se, but rather this more intense extended drought as well as flooding. So we start implementing changes in extended drought. So remove the rain in a critical part of the season or different parts, and see without adaptation if you can change the planting. And so in addition to modeling this long-term scenario and presenting the case, we're also measuring it at the Kellogg Biological Station with this several of this rainout shelter across this long-term site for the last 30 years. So without going in the results, obviously the improved cultivars and earlier planting would allow to build more carbon, versus conventional tillage basically goes down deeper in losses. So Frank really mentioned correctly that if we want to go to start addressing, go at the field scale, you run into a completely different game. And here we're challenged by two things. We got the data, and we have a pretty boring system where we know everything about how they manage. And so we can go at the field scale. And we have been doing that because of the remote sensing imagery, capturing this historical perspective, and have been able to quantify how stable production is in these fields, subfields. So which part of the fields always give high yield versus fields that always give lower yield, and parts that fluctuate. So the part that they go from one year to the next, it's a challenge for us in terms of addressing climate variability. And because it's an interaction system, we have been able that for any field that you can click on, you basically have a three-dimensional field, and you know the areas that is more vulnerable to water deficit, the hilltops, the sloping land, versus the areas that in the Midwest, you'll be surprised we have the opposite problem of having sometimes too much water. So basically water that stands and affects the production in terms of anaerobic conditions and denitrification, not uniform emergence of seeds, and in addition to taking nutrients at a very different rate. So the high and stable are rather efficient, 75%, while the low and stable, only 45% of the fertilizer is taken up, which is rather a low amount. And so we've been able to quantify a pretty complete life cycle analysis of how much CO2 is emitted in N2O, as well as how much runs into the Mississippi. But we now know from where in each part of the field this loss is produced. Another interesting piece in terms of contributing to protocols in AgMIP, when you go to field scale, most of the application have been just using spatial variations in soils. And so let me guide you through this. The map on the lower left is spatial variability of soil type. It's been available in actually many places. Europe is like the US has. But if you just run by capturing soil properties, you may not be able to reproduce the variations in the yield monitor in the data that you see above. So on the left here, you see the stability zones that I've just explained, how these areas have been affected. And if you run the model by capturing the stability zones, which is a system, again, where it includes topography, number of plants that emerge, so very dynamic approach. This is a little bit quite a bit different than a normal application of what you would do in a crop. So you got to parameterize the model, and we're learning that quite well on how using remote sensing for inverse modeling of properties. And so if you look at the two maps, the one that is using the stability map resemble much more the one with the yield monitor, versus if you only run the variability based on soils. It just doesn't capture the areas that it was a good soils in depression, it flooded, and the model says it gave you 220 bushels. Sorry for these strange units, I still can't get around it myself, but I use a map that was already prepared. And so that's about 12 tons. And when in reality, it was less than 5. And so because of flooding, and the model was able to capture if you use the stability map. So we're now again in a position to run on any single field and partition the zones across the Midwest for this, in this case, 80 million. We don't include some of the corn grown in Texas or Florida. But anyway, we capture this interaction of stability zones. And so now the farmers are able to really make better decisions if you were to run on a specific subfield. And they are very much attracted. We deliver prescription maps to a large number, all those stars that you saw. The next thing that AgMIP North America is trying to get at is improving the efficiency and leading to a circular system. So I had the opportunity to share additional thoughts on this on the first day when we had a panel on circularity. And so this initiative led by Jim Jones and I, in this particular case, on the corn and soybean open system, models play a critical role in capturing the system and the feedbacks. And so we're really working hard on getting a better understanding of the efficiency and what if scenario to lead the vision of what it will take for this sort of system to become more efficient. So this is an example of a baseline circular, how much linear the system is rather than circular. But if we were to reduce fertilizer application based on prescription maps, how much more circularity you bring back in terms of increasing efficiency. You don't necessarily bring back additional, return to manure residues, but we're looking at all the strategies that will allow to basically increase efficiency and return more flow and energy and carbon and water and nitrogen back into the system. So one other thing that we learned as a result of spatial variation and big data, this is beyond just, precision agriculture, is understanding areas that have been always underperforming. As you can see in the yellow areas there of low and stable, I was recently awarded a pretty large project to work with farmers to implement precision practices. So I've had hundreds of farmers that they've signed up and they receive incentives. So they're going to have the biodiversity or areas where the sides of the fields can be grown with cover crops, so they can get seeds to scale cover crops and so on. So we're moving into this precision conservation, which is very important to increase biodiversity. And so we've been modeling that. And just to conclude, another very interesting work that we're doing, we have an atlas of the entire US. This is not just the Midwest, where we know where land has been abandoned. And when it's been abandoned, for what reason, and what type of land was it, and so on. So we've been running an AgMIP, very much so approach of running these models that had native prairies and switchgrass. And so the Salus, Descent, Upsim, and the Ensemble, we got three more models coming in, Epic, Cropsist, and part of this set had to be adjusted to be able to capture these crops. But we confirmed that the Ensemble, the median, gave a very good prediction, better than some of the models. So in the end, I want to conclude with this diagram that I thought it's very important, because it really describes what's happening in the US. Again, mostly for the Midwest. Remember that one of the states that is the most critical in agriculture is California, but it's so diverse, it's vegetables. So I am on the side looking at even modeling some of those systems, but as a big demand and challenges, again, from prescription mapping to regenerative ags, this is what's happening in the Midwest. You got sensors all over, taking measurements, AI application, stability maps that are able to capture this variability. You can run scenarios of see the areas that respond to nitrogen versus the areas that should go to biodiversity sort of approach, trying to do all in a trade-off analysis to improve, again, both better decisions with stakeholders, scalability. And the goal is, as this project that I was assigned, is also almost a preview of the movie before, changes to the bills are made, because farmers are coming on board, playing a role, and they are being incentivized to move into this decision. So with that, I'll stop, and I'll be happy to answer any question you may have. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Bruno. There's one question already. It's from De Williams. Thank you, Bruno. How difficult would it be to apply your models to ecosystem services?
It isn't at all. I mean, you've seen the dynamic maps. They generated soil carbon sequestration and nitrate leaching. The output that is shown in the paper is quantified in terms of N2O emissions. And tomorrow I'll describe briefly some of how this approach is basically converts into an existing approach of generating carbon credits for farmers. And that's extremely exciting.
Yeah, there's another one just came in from Heidi Weber. Bruno, you gave a very nice example of inverse modeling and learning from remote sensing yield monitoring to improve process-based modeling. Do you think there is scope for an AgMIP activity in this direction? Hybrid modeling, model data assimilation, or are the approaches demands still too unique?
Very good question, Heidi. Thank you. Yes, we found remote sensing to be extremely useful in basically using plants as indicators of what's happening. And because of this long project that I had, I found that thermal imagery converted into a stability of which areas always showed hotter temperature versus areas that they were cooler temperature. It basically, it gave us a gift of being able to parameterize soil depth and initial conditions. And so the simulation, in fact, the example that you saw in using the stability map is capturing position in the landscape, soil, and integration with rainfall. So there is certain fertile soils for doing this, and actually that's one of the tasks that I wanted to move on within. It doesn't have to be just North America, but certainly it's a one way. We know how models work and how well they've done. The same models give a different response. It's hard to think that either the model does not capture that process at all or well. Most of the time is related to the inputs not being at the quality of what they should be, or we pretend to know what it's going in. And so that has shown for us to, I work in a very different environment because of the diversity lack, basically, but it has shown us what works and what does not work in terms of helping models do better through better input.
Okay, thanks, Bruno. I think that's all the questions I could see. There was one for Kelly, if Kelly's still there. It was from Carlos Fuller. Several Caribbean countries want to increase forest cover. But for example, Barbados planting 1 million trees, not hectares. Can the water demand be modeled and to see if it's feasible? Can you answer that, Kelly?
I'm not the best person to answer that. I think there are models. I think somebody mentioned to me that SWAT is one of them. But Carlos, what we are very much looking to do is take a look at the NDCs and the other activities like that one in Barbados, and look at how we can use AgMIP approaches to inform them. So, but perhaps somebody else wants to comment in more detail about the modeling of water demand.
I think, you know, any model, once, even if it's a very simple approach like, you know, EPIC or SALUS or APEX, once you establish a leaf area index that the canopy has closed, as long as you do a good job in modeling the evaporative demand, the potential, you'll be able to do a good job in water demand. That's one of the least things we worry about. We have a good understanding of the physics of the water balance.
Yeah, there's all sorts of approaches. We could get into landscape and catchment-based models and try and understand all the flows. There's just been a paper by a colleague, Kaushal Garg, on that in India, using fairly simple modeling approaches too, but extremely powerful messages to policymakers. Okay, Caroline, I think.
I have just a comment on, you know, the situation of the Caribbean and the replanting of forest also sort of begs the question of extreme, you know, events, because, you know, what removed the forest? Well, there was probably human factors, but the probably cyclones and things coming through is the most significant, and has, you know, some parts of Haiti, I believe, are almost completely decimated of trees. So it's also something that requires, yeah. Anyway, Kelly, I would be interested in any of the comments that you might have, you know, regarding how you take into consideration all the various things that are going on, especially in the vulnerable kind of island situations, in which case there's both risk of cyclones and limited sort of groundwater reserves with you know, infiltration of saline things and whatnot. But yeah.
Okay, so Caroline, I think we've got 5 or 6 minutes before the closing ceremony. So our session now is to just give a quick wrap up. So thank you very much, Bruno, for your great presentation, also Kelly.
Thank you, Anthony and Caroline. Thank you.
Do you want to, have you got a few words to say, Caroline, then I can finish off, or?
No, I think I'm good. Go ahead. Okay. Yes.
All right. So we've gone through a global region session. We started off probably mostly in Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, with Dilys McCarthy giving us, taking us through a lot of the West African work that has been done over the past 5 or 6 years, using AgMIP protocols to look at smallholder production systems, and that work continues actually. Same in South Asia. A number of us see a number of the colleagues in the participants list who've been very involved in the AgMIP regions work, and that has really had a big impact on stakeholders and policies. And increasingly, that's the direction of our work, is trying to influence policymakers in South Asia, and in part using our AgMIP work that was done over all those years. We heard some updates on the AgMIP rice work in East Asia, very active researchers there. A lot of resources to be looking at heat tolerance and heat effects on rice and modeling those effects. But I think the conclusion was they have had little impact on policymakers. because they haven't been able to attract or engage with the broader socioeconomic community to look at these other issues of climate impact. We had an update from Australia on their efforts to model wheat and compare those models and the generated scenarios. And I think Australia is in an interesting position in terms of politics and policy at the moment, struggling to catch up with some of the more modern thinking on how we tackle adaptation and mitigation. We moved then on to Europe, and Frank Everett gave us a lot of new work that's going on around science policy engagement, a phase 3 Maxua program. He talked about what's happening in Europe, particularly around the Green Deal and the chemical and pest-free agriculture. And what tends to happen, I notice, is that Europe takes on these issues initially, and then they start spreading to the rest of the world. So I think it's a good way of seeing what will happen over the next 5 or 10 years in other parts of the world as well. We heard from Latin America and Caribbean a good summary of work right across the geographies using integrated analysis techniques, often with AgMIP protocols, and often with stakeholder and policy engagement. And finally, we heard from Bruno and the North American intensive systems, particularly around corn, soybean, and tweaking precision ag with, I guess, the big data story, collecting large amounts of data remotely through digital agriculture, and very practical modeling, meshing work that's going on. And it's directly applied by farmers for mainly intensifying and making their systems more sustainable and more intensive. So that was a fantastic session, I thought. Thanks very much for all the questions that came in. I'm not sure if the presentations will be made available. There was a question earlier, Cynthia, maybe you know that, or Carolyn?
I understand they will be, right, Carolyn?
Yeah, we're going to be reviewing the videos of all the sessions starting next week, and we'll start posting those. As for slide sets, some contain unpublished work, so we'll have to basically clear those with the contributors before we share those. But we'll certainly be starting on that Monday. So yeah.
Yeah, in the last minute, Alex is suggesting that he could add a final thought on how AgMIP regions can bring scientific communities together to inform action. So Alex, you've got a minute or so.
Thank you. So I just wanted to add a quick word. Seeing all of these great activities happening in all of the regions, it's really important to recognize kind of how AgMIP brings these regions together, and the idea of building up some kind of community within the regions so that there is established networks of multiple disciplines and scales and modeling approaches. Not only does it make it so that the crop modeling efforts in any given region are more coherent and collaborative, it makes it a little bit easier for the stakeholders to engage when they're hearing common messages and able to interact with kind of leaders from the region. The other thing that's really important is that we find the best approaches from each region and look for transferability kind of options. So if what Bruno is doing in the United States is possible to bring to Europe or to Brazil or to Africa, let's find those opportunities. And in that sense, it's not just about a bunch of independent regional projects. It's about thinking about how these protocols can be developed, demonstrated, and then transferred from region to region so that the best practices really proliferate. And then finally, of course, if we can come up with an approach that's really useful, that allows us to get to a whole other level, which is our coordinated global and regional assessments. So if we can follow the same protocol in many different regions, now we can start to aggregate into global questions and answers. So this is really exciting to see all the great and continuing work in the regions. But one of the best things about these AgMIP global workshops is that cross-region transfer and exchange. And I hope that the discussions today will lead to more of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. So I think our job's done. Caroline and Cynthia, I'll hand over to you, Cynthia.
Yes, thank you so much, Anthony and Carolyn, for leading the AgMIP Advances session on regions. And thank you to all the presenters, really bringing forward the exciting work of using AgMIP approaches, AgMIP models, in training stakeholders in regions all around the world. Now we're just about to start our closing session, and I see Jean-François Susanna has now joined. Welcome. Before we move to the closing of these 3 days, I have to share my screen because there is one more workshop tomorrow that we want to invite you to. So I'm going to share my screen and just share, and it is relevant to the, uh-oh, why isn't it up? Oh no. Hold on a second. I'm having a bit of trouble with these kinds of things. Just a second. Yes. Here we go. All right. Let me try again. Sorry. Okay. So I should be able to now share my screen, I hope. Yes. Yes, here we are, sorry. So tomorrow we're having a workshop to partnership of the Global Research Alliance and AgMIP on modeling mitigation and adaptation co-benefits. One reason why it's in a good timing following this region session, because one of the things that we will be doing and discussing and having breakout sessions in this workshop tomorrow morning is on developing a set of pilot projects, such as, for example, Kelly was describing in Latin America and Caribbean. And Sonali McDermott and Roberto Valdivia are chairing the workshop, and we have wonderful people coming. With the modelers are coming, the regional experts, some of whom you've seen today. So please, everyone is welcome. Go to the AgMIP program, and you'll find the Zoom link there. So special invitation for it's really a full workshop morning on modeling mitigation and adaptation co-benefits. So that was before. So just even though we're moving to closing, it's the 3 days of the full workshop is closing, but we have just wanted to make sure you knew about that. So we're now starting the our closing remarks in the next half hour. And we're going to be turning to Jean-François Susanna, the executive committee leaders of AgMIP, and Alex and Carolyn for their final thoughts of the very intensive and I think very exciting virtual workshop that we've had over the past 4 days. And then at the very end, we're going to be sharing something about AgMIP8, the next event. So do stay around for that. But now let's turn to Jean-François. I'm going to now stop sharing so we can really see Jean-François, and please give your final thoughts.
Thank you, Cynthia, and it's great really to see this event, this 3D event. I would really like to congratulate the core team of AgMIP and all contributors, because I think it has demonstrated a lot of strengths, creating a program that is developing quickly and is targeting issues that are really relevant for all countries in the world. As you know, we will have next year the UN Food System Summit, and really what it will do is show to the world that those issues that connect food systems, climate change, adaptation and mitigation, they are really central to our future. I think it's fantastic to see that AgMIP is now expanding its remits, now encompassing the greenhouse gas emissions from the food systems, and also the really important issues of food system shocks and their links with food and nutritional security. So it's great to see how quickly this has been achieved with the program. And meanwhile, the strengths of the global community have been very well represented during this meeting. I do not have time to cite all the components, but for instance, the regional component really did a lot, and we see now the global coverage and how the different regions connect, but also the advances in not only single crop, but crop systems modeling, links to soils, the graded approaches, global to regional. This is really very strong, and here again, I think that the maturity of the AgMIP project is just fantastic, and a perfect demonstration is this meeting, where you see that you can run an ambitious online program and get a worldwide attendance. So as mentioned by Cynthia, tomorrow we still have this ambitious session co-constructed with the Global Research Alliance. And I think it is important in terms of climate action. Climate action is a sort of buzzword you hear from the governments. And climate action is actually encompassing both adaptation and mitigation. And we have learned that co-benefits between adaptation and mitigation are really important. This was a lesson learned from the last IPCC report on climate change and land. However, we hardly see yet how this will work, those co-benefits, how can they work in specific systems, in specific regions. So a lot yet to be done still. So congratulations all, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Jean-François. Jean-François is the co-chair of the AgMIP Steering Council. So that's why we wanted to ask him to give the first final thoughts. And Ghassem Asrar, the other co-chair, gave the opening welcome. So we've been bookended by our fantastic co-chairs of our steering council, and we thank both you, Jean-François, and Ghassem, and all the members of our steering council for the guidance to help AgMIP fulfill its mission.
Thank you, Cynthia.
All right, now we're turning to, next we turn to the ExecCom, and first up is John Antle. What are your final thoughts, John?
Hi, everybody. Well, I just wanted to first of all say thanks to all the participants, like Jean-François was just saying, the presenters, but also just all the participants. It's really, I think just the quality of, the chats, the questions, everything that's gone on in these sessions has been tremendous. But also, we really have to acknowledge the support that Columbia University and NASA have given to AgMIP and the other donors like DFID, of course, and other organizations. But especially, I want to thank the AgMIP team there in New York. You guys have really just done a fantastic job of putting this program together and making it happen just seamlessly. So this has been the best Zoom experience I've ever had for something like this, I think. And so really kudos to just all the organization. The other thing I wanted to comment about was just that, I think this web shop has really done a great job of conveying the state of the science, but also pointing towards our, next generation directions. In all the different ways that we've been talking about. And it really strikes me, as many of you know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, we did a small project on next generation agricultural systems modeling. And it just strikes me how much we have progressed since then. And some of the elements that we talked about then have started to play out, and then many new ideas have come forward. I thought this session this morning on from assessment to action was really spectacular. informative and really points some important new directions. But what I want to wrap up with is two quick points. One is that, yes, the models are important, next generation models, but what's really more important are the next generation modelers. And I think many of them were here participating in this program and listening in, but maybe one area that we should think about with AgMIP as we go forward is how we can do a better job of building that next generation of modelers. So that's just a little thought for maybe as we go forward. And then finally, the really important point I want to make is we need a next generation hats. You may recall that these hats were, I believe, everyone who came to the last workshop, in-person workshop in New York, got hats. And if we're really losing something from this, virtual approach, I guess we could have virtual hats, but somehow I don't think that would cut it. So anyway, my challenge to AgMIP for the next in-person meeting is we need a next generation of hats.
Wonderful. I love it. I love it. I love it. It's great. Wonderful. Thank you, John, for those wonderful final thoughts. And now to Anthony Whitfred.
Thank you. I was just about to run to my son's room and get the AgMIP sunglasses because he's still wearing those from 4 or 5 years ago. So I think that would have been a good prop to go with what John had just put on his hat. So thanks. Yeah, so I've just run the session with Caroline on the regions. The regions was a long-term effort funded by USDA and DFID. And we find that the work continues, even though the funding has largely finished, although we just got a new smaller project with IBRC that's running in East Africa and West Africa. The work continues. There's papers continuing to develop from the regions, particularly covering work in West Africa, East Africa, and the South Asia work that Professor Gita covered. There's lots of related low input work developing from the earlier efforts. There was a large AgMIP work on low input systems that Gassion Falconier has just conducted with Mark Corbilles, and we've just published a paper in Global Climate Change on Mace models or modeling climate change scenarios. And that's moving on to how we're modeling low input systems, particularly responses to nitrogen and carbon dynamics. And so these efforts will continue. But there is a need. I'm living in Tanzania. I'm working for ICRISAT right throughout Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And our capacity is extremely limited still. A lot of our parameterization data is very limited. The net, the soils, the models that remain in a fairly rudimentary level of development. A lot of the development was done 15 to 20 years ago, and a lot of the models we use haven't moved on very much. The capacity of human capacity in the regions is still limited. There's no major uplift of capacity development programs. There's a lot of good modelers that are coming from Africa and being trained in Europe and the US, and some of them are coming back, but often when they come back, they're not supported to continue their modeling. So we still have a lot of limitations, and we need to work on these aspects as well. And the final area I want to develop further is the stakeholder engagement. We heard today in the regions a lot of great examples of how we're using modeling scenarios in stakeholder engagement and policy engagement. I think that's just the tip of the iceberg, and we started on that road of knowing how to engage stakeholders in these RAPs and trying to explain to them these complicated scenarios that we're developing. I think we've got a long way to go still to be showing this kind of integrated assessment and helping, especially in developing countries, policymakers make sensible decisions that will position their countries for adaptation and mitigation in the future. So as part of the CG system, the CGIAR system, it's going through a major change at the moment as well. We're going into a kind of a one CGIAR where we're aiming at working much more collaboratively across all the different centres. And I think, again, this is another opportunity to bring the modelling teams from across the CGIAR, from IFPRI, from ICRISAT, from CIMIT, from IRI, together to work in teams that then can contribute more effectively into AgMIP. So thank you very much to the Columbia team for putting on the fantastic session. Thanks very much for Eric for controlling all the technology. It seemed to work seamlessly. Thanks very much. It's getting late here, so in a few minutes I'm going to go to bed.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anthony, for staying up late and chairing the region session, and for your final thoughts. Next up is Senthil Aseng.
Thanks, Cynthia. I'd like to say that I'm impressed how AgMIP, which you all are part of, has actually evolved over the last 10 years by linking disciplines, linking research activities, linking modelers and experimentalists, something very important, but also getting new data sources involved now. But probably most important also the way AgMIP has been linking with users across regions in the world, helping people on the ground. So AgMIP is, I think, is a network which creates now a really great opportunity to address some of the very complicated issues, like which we started to sort of address now, extreme climate events in combination with other stresses, leading to shocks which potentially devastating consequences for food systems. With that, I hope you all enjoyed AgMIP8 as much as I did. A big thanks again to the organizers, but again also to all the participants. I hope to see you all in person soon again. Stay safe.
Thank you, Senthil. And next is Herman Lotzekampen, also from Europe.
Yes, thank you, Cynthia. Well, the later you are in the chain, the more difficult it gets to say something in addition. So I can only second my colleagues here. Great organization. I'm really impressed. Thanks also to all the participants. I saw a lot of experienced faces, but a lot of young people, PhD students and so on. That's very nice. So I think this was a real success also to keep the momentum going. I want to add two comments. One on, well, where we come from. We focused a lot on climate impacts and model comparison and robustness checks and so on. And now we are broadening the scope, and maybe that's the journey for the next 10 years, broadening the scope on, well, the two main topics from this meeting on shocks and resilience, and also on food systems as a whole. And I think in these two domains, AgMIP can really use, well, the core competence. So we are the agricultural model intercomparison and improvement project. So improving our models on these issues, comparing them, what we already can do, what we cannot do, and also linking models across domains and scales. And I think we need this for, and it has shown in the very interesting breakouts that this is needed, that we can do a lot. There are a lot of interesting research questions in these two domains, and those are absolutely needed. And I think we can show that well, this community has grown and is stable over the last 10 years, and we can just build on this and keep going to explore these two domains, in addition to all the unfinished business on climate impacts and adaptation, and also mitigation, which will not go away, of course, and it's also linked to resilience and to food systems as a whole. And the other point is, for whom are we doing this? Unfortunately, I couldn't be in the Actions workshop today, but I think it would be good to think about into which regular processes we can feed in our results. So we have focused a lot on IPCC, which is good, and we'll keep doing that. But we should probably link more closely to FAO and all processes around it. Maybe that has been mentioned in this in the sessions today, or events like the UN Food System Summit coming up, where a lot of the work we are doing would fit very well. And I just hope that there will also be a demand directly to AgMIP to contribute to these processes. So this is what I wanted to add. Thanks again, thanks very much. And I'm really looking forward to coming to New York City next year to meet all of you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Herman. Now we're going to come to the home team. Alex is the science coordinator of AgMIP. So Alex, would you please share your final thoughts? And then we're going to ask Carolyn to say a few words as well.
All right, I'm hoping my video is coming through. I'm not sure if it is, but I was inspired by John to find my AgMIP climate hat. So if that comes through, you'll see it. But in the meantime, I'm going to just share one quick slide, which is to encourage the audience and the participants here to get involved. You've seen a lot of ideas. Hopefully you agree with me that there's been some great discussion and great ideas at AgMIP8. And we want to take these up as protocols and as collaborative work that we can incorporate into new AgMIP activities or into the AgMIP activities that already exist. If you were inspired by something here and want to get going with a new AgMIP activity, whether it's a research or an application or a regional activity, the things that you need to keep in mind is that AgMIP activities are oriented towards informing decisions for pressing societal challenges. They are open and protocol-based activities, which we demonstrate and then expand to invite more regions and modelers and others to participate. In general, we try to keep them targeted so that specific responses or system behaviors or opportunities can be understood. And we try to include multiple modeling groups and locations and systems so that we are leading to transferable types of results. We also generally feature methodological and model intercomparison and improvement as a key element. And whenever possible, we connect to other AgMIP activities so that we have transferable results. But in many cases, I would imagine that the new ideas can be linked to some efforts that have already been going on before, which means we have a higher platform from which to build upon. The other thing that's very important is everything we do within AgMIP is inclusive and we share credit. So everybody deserves credit for their contributions, including the data providers and the stakeholder engagement experts. So if you want to get involved and join and set up new activities, you can always contact us at info@agmip.org. And you should check out www.agmip.org to join our listserv so that you can learn about new AgMIP activities as they're being launched and events. And we also have, as part of the AgMIP8 web shop, collected a large number of updates from each of the teams. It's not time to go through these all now, but you'll see that from each of our teams, we have collected information about the, oh, this one's animated, about the kind of latest finding, overview description, the leaders, and there's a lot that you can find, and we're going to be updating our website so that people can keep track of the latest activities. So that's our final word, or at least my final word is get involved and help AgMIP do great things. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. That was terrific. We're now coming to the time of thank yous, and Alex and the exec-com want to thank first of all, we had committees that were organized to help make this happen. So there was a steering committee, that's all on the web. You'll see all the people that had input to shaping the program, as did the science committee. So thank you to all of those inputs. And then we had our local organizing committee, and we want to specifically and with a deep, heartfelt gratitude, thank Carolyn Mutter and her team, Eric Menkos and Maria Dombrov. Without them, this virtual web shop would not be happening. It would not have happened at all. So all three of them just really, really made this happen. So tremendous thanks, Carolyn and Eric and Maria. So Carolyn, I want to turn to you for your final thoughts. And share some, thoughts also, and then I'll come back and give the AgMIP8 potential, the news about the next event. But Carolyn, over to you.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate, and I really appreciate the team. It's really a team approach that we follow at Columbia with AgMIP, and with Eric and Maria providing really important contributions. So I can't say enough about how able they are. It's been a real pleasure just looking at and viewing all the different presentations and comments over the past several days. And at one point I started to think that the degree to which our AgMIP researchers are motivated to link expertise and models is starting to approach sort of forensic quality. But instead of investigating crimes, we're investigating opportunities, which is wonderful. So thank you so much for everyone for your efforts in the modeling and your explorations of new ways to be more inclusive, whether it has to do with incorporation of nutrition elements, gender elements, or decision factors, because these are all critical aspects. We had intended to have a gender and inclusion session, but one thing that we realized is that this is an area in which we could benefit by some of the guidance that Bruce Curry-Alder provided this morning, where we work together to build strength and share understanding. And we would like to propose that AgMIP and IDRC come together to create an experience about gender and inclusion in research, because it's a very important topic. And it's not just in the human dimension, it actually has to infiltrate into the model dimension. And although we talk about it a bit, it's not very clear to me necessarily how these elements may be included. And related to that, because the gender dimension is also related to the nutrition dimension, and how the nutrition elements will start to infiltrate some of the modeling exercises. And these are challenging remaining questions that we really need to think about and advance. So I'm very excited about all of the results and accomplishments that we were able to share this week, and I can't wait for the next event.
Wonderful, thank you, Carolyn. I want to return to Eric. Actually, we got a question in the chat about the registration. Actually, not one single person would have been able to register without Eric. Eric, can you give the number, please?
Yeah, as of this morning, we were at about 1,030 registrants. Seems like every time I check, there's a slightly higher number, but sorry, I'm just scrolling just to see if I can see it right now. As of 3 p.m. today, 1,033.
Isn't that amazing? It's just amazing. And you see, it's a silver lining from having to do it virtually, that we were able then to have a greater outreach. Usually for our in-person AgMIP global workshops, up till now, we've had about 250 registrants. So, so that is something good that came from having to go virtually. Thank you, Eric. So now I'm going to share my screen for the final slide. Hope this works. Here it is. So this is to invite everyone to save the date for AgMIP8, the next event, which is already scheduled for June 7th to 11th, 2021. We don't know whether it will need to be a fully virtual global workshop again, or part 2, or the next event, or whether it could be a hybrid event. Some groups are some conferences are doing a hybrid approach. We just, as we all know, the uncertainties are too great in terms of planning. But we, in the course of planning the global workshop, this had been the original date, then we were going to move it to June, then we decided we're going to keep both dates. So AgMIP is all reserved basically for a next event, for AgMIP8. And so many really fantastic things came up in this in this web shop. We think that it's really important that we build on what we've done, create a different, it will be not the same, it will be a different event, building on, deepening on, thinking about maybe the formation of the teams, more workshop approach perhaps, more protocol based, working on our papers for our AGU special collection in the AGU journals. We don't know, we're open to ideas, but please do save those dates, because that will be the next event for AgMIP8. And with that, we're going to close the AgMIP8 3-day workshop. Remember, please come to the workshop tomorrow on the modeling of mitigation and adaptation co-benefits. But this is the 3-day formal program of the of AgMIP8 is over. Any final logistics from any of the AgMIP team here at Columbia and New York? Are we all set? I think so. If not, thanks to everybody, all the participants, all the presenters, speakers, breakout leaders, early career folks who did wonderful jobs on their rapporteuring. All the best. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.